What is going on today, guys? Welcome back to another Fix It Garage video. It is time to start tearing into our budget Civic project. That's right. If you guys remember in the last video, we introduced this new Civic that I bought with my own money for $100, and now we are going to start fixing it. So obviously we want to make this thing look pretty, but before we spend any time, effort, or money on making this car look better, we need to make it run right. And right now, it doesn't run right. It's got a blown head gasket, so we need to go ahead and get this cylinder head removed so we can send it off for machining. That also lets us check the block and the pistons for any other damage that we can't see. Hopefully we don't find any surprises inside this motor, because if we do, that will increase the cost substantially. But first, we need to start tearing this apart and pull off this cylinder head. All right, we're starting off handheld before I start tearing it apart. The first things that we're gonna need to take off are gonna be our intake assembly. We need to get the inlet manifold off. We need to get the exhaust unbolted from the front of the engine. Those are some pretty basic things we need to remove. We'll also need to remove a lot of our drive belt accessories to get access to our timing belt, so we can pull the timing belt off in order to remove this cylinder head. Now there's lots of different ways to take all of this apart, and I'm gonna try and show you guys some of my tricks that I use, but I also wanna get this thing ripped apart so I can start looking at what's wrong. First things first, we're gonna take off a lot of the obvious stuff, and then we'll start taking apart other things on this car. So let's get started on tearing this thing apart right now. Quick little piece of advice when you're taking these things apart. Remember to mark the distributor to the cylinder head, so when you put it back on, you can line it up and the distributor will be timed correctly. I like to use a Sharpie when I do this. So what I'll do is I'll just draw a Sharpie line on the engine and on my distributor, and when I put it back together, those two marks need to line up. Just that simple. All right, we're going handheld for a second. We've got all of this stuff off and out of the way. We pulled the distributor and we used the Sharpie to mark it both here and on our distributor. So this side is almost all torn apart other than some coolant lines and a few sensors. And then this coolant line. Up next, we're going to focus on getting off everything on this side, our drive belts and all of that. And then we can start getting access to the timing belt. So let's go ahead and start tearing everything apart on this side of the motor, and then we'll start tearing up a bit. So let's go ahead and start tearing apart everything on this side of the motor. Okay, so we made a little bit of progress. We got the valve cover off and we can see the valves now, which honestly, everything in here looks okay for having 300,000 miles on it. Nothing I wouldn't expect to see. This will all clean up really nice in a parts washer or brake cleaning the crap out of it, whatever we end up doing, but this looks totally fine. We also got that alternator unbolted. You can see that I have the top of it swung back right here. That's normally bolted into this bracket, so we swung it out of the way. This will allow us to get our timing belt off, and it will allow us to get the cylinder head off without taking too much excessive parts off. Next thing we need to do is get that big old crank off. But before we do, we actually need to set the timing, which on this engine isn't too hard. We're gonna rotate the engine counterclockwise. One little trick I've learned with Hondas specifically is Hondas have engines both on this side of the car and over here. And sometimes it's confusing which way you need to rotate it. Well, what I've learned from all of my years working for Honda is always rotate whatever you're using to turn the engine towards the front of the car when you're on the crank. So all the engines like the B series, the H series, the D series, all of those spin counterclockwise like this engine. And then your J series, your K series, your L series engines that are on the other side, they rotate clockwise. If you think about it, when you take our ratchet and we rotate it on the crank, we're gonna go this way, which rolls the engine counterclockwise. Whereas if we go over to this side, if the engine was over here and we were rotating it this way, we're going clockwise, which is the direction that the engine spins. Neat little fun fact if you work for Honda or if you're working on a Honda, that's a fun little fact about Hondas. Always rotate the crankshaft towards the front of the car and you're always spinning the engine in the way that it spins when it's running. That way you're never spinning the motor backwards when doing timing and things like that. So that's a little fun fact. But right now we need to set our timing and then we will go ahead and pull off that crank pulley in the lower cover and get that timing belt out of the way. And we'll be like halfway done with this car. Like these head gaskets aren't really that bad. But let's get you guys back on a tripod and I'll show you guys how to set the timing. All right, so I'm going to attempt to show you guys how to set the timing on this car while you guys are in my complete way from trying to set the timing. But I'm gonna show you guys how I do it. The first thing we need to do is put our tool on the crank pulley, which is now done. And we're going to make sure we spin it in the correct direction, which in this case is counterclockwise. So we're gonna use a flashlight to kind of watch. We're gonna rotate our engine around. And keep rotating it. Now on this tooth, or on this part right here, there's a sign that says up. Well, guess what? We want that up. That is gonna be cylinder 1 top dead center. It's kind of hard to see, but on here, there's these little marks on the gear. Well, those are also on the backside. So one way to make sure that it's in time is you put a feeler gauge on the cylinder head like this, and you can touch it to the back of the gear. And if it touches the divot in the gear, you are in time cylinder 1 top dead center. Or if you've been doing it a long time like me, you can just look and see and go, yep, this is cylinder 1 top dead center. There's also a mark down here on the crank that I will show you guys once I have the crankshaft off, or sorry. There's also a mark on the crank, which I will show you guys once we have the crank pulley off and the timing cover off. I'll show you what I'm looking at, but I can also make sure that that's lined up. That tells me that this engine is now at cylinder 1, top dead center, so now we can pull off that crank pulley and the lower timing cover, which is exactly the next thing that we're gonna do. Well, as you just saw from that very quick time lapse, crank pulley didn't come off yet. Kind of a good bit of advice. Always keep your impact gun batteries fully charged before you go trying to take off that pulley. Both my batteries are pretty much toast, so I have to recharge those batteries and then we'll try to get that pulley off. And if I still can't get it off, I'll have to bring home an air gun to finish it, which would suck because that means I can't tear it all apart in one night. For you guys, it'll be one episode. For me, it means 2 nights of working instead of just 1. But fear not, we can keep working. Right now, while we let the batteries charge, we're gonna go ahead and get this exhaust manifold off and probably get the coolant drained and start trying to get that intake manifold off. The more things we have off, the better off we are for pulling that cylinder head. And worst case, if I really can't get it off, I can, for now, slide the belt off of this and take the cylinder head off without removing the belt all the way. Not the ideal way, but I can do it that way if I need to. So I'm gonna just start draining the coolant. You guys don't need to watch that, that's boring. We'll start pulling off this exhaust manifold, at least off of the cylinder head, so we can pull it out of the way. So that's what you guys are gonna see next. All right, 1 exhaust manifold removed. I forgot to film the 3 bolts down there, but if we go look over here at it, you'll see that there were 3 nuts that were on here. They're 14 millimeters. Went ahead and took those off along with the bracket 14 millimeter bolt. So pretty straightforward to get that exhaust manifold off, and now we can see the front side of our cylinder head. So you guys are gonna get a better look than me. You guys can see kind of, hold on. Well, you guys can't see any better than I can inside that cylinder head. We'll take a look at it once we get the head off, but if you look in there, you can normally see like the valves and kind of look at the condition of them, which we will go over once we get this cylinder head off. But now that we have that done, the next phase is going to be getting this intake manifold off and out of the way, as well as getting all of our coolant lines unhooked from the cylinder head on this side. Our battery is still over there charging. Hopefully it will be charged up soon and we can get this engine, hopefully it's charged up soon so we can get our cylinder head off. But let's proceed, let's keep on moving forward and start working on getting all this stuff torn apart. We slid the belt off of our cam gear. All right, so as you just saw, we slid the belt off the cam gear. Now, obviously we're not gonna put it back on this way. The issue is right now, I can't get that gear off of or I can't get the pulley off of the crank. I need a tool from work to do it, and I can't go get it tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the head off, and then what I'll do is when we reassemble the car, I will get that pulley off of there. Actually, I'll probably end up doing it another random night when I'm working on the car, but I don't want that to slow down my progress. So now that I've got that done, the coolant has finished draining finally. So we can start disassembling the motor, or so we can start disassembling the intake, get that out of the way, and the cylinder head will be ready to just pop right off. Alrighty guys, we have everything removed from around this cylinder head. We are ready to go ahead and get this cylinder head out of the car, and that is the very next thing we're going to do. I'm gonna loosen all these bolts up and we're gonna get this cylinder head off and start inspecting the head gasket, the block, and the cylinder head itself. All right guys, so the first thing we do when we unbolt a cylinder head that I always recommend is you go outside in when you loosen a cylinder head. That equally releases the torque of the cylinder head and prevents any further warpage of the block or the head. So let's go ahead and unbolt it on these. They are 14 millimeter bolts. So we're gonna use a big breaker bar and pop all these guys loose. So once you get past the outside ones, it's a little harder to get a socket on there if you're using 1/2 inch. So now I've switched to a 3/8 drive, so it's a little bit thinner socket, so it fits better and allows me to get to these bolts. All right, and with that, the tension has now been relieved off of the cylinder head, so we can go ahead and unbolt them the rest of the way with an impact gun. When pulling these out, you always want to make sure you kind of keep track of the order and check their lengths, because sometimes these engines will have a head bolt that is longer or shorter than the rest of them, and it's very important you put that one back in the right spot or you will crack the engine block. And that is the last thing that we want to do. And you guys can't smell it, but whenever you do a head gasket, especially on an older car, they let off this really weird smell whenever you get the head bolts off. Don't ask me why, it's just kind of what they do. But you can see here in my tray, I've got my head bolts in the order. This is the front cylinder head, transmission side to engine, and then transmission side to engine for the rear head bolts. And I'm gonna keep it exactly this way to keep it nice and organized. All right, once we get all the bolts off, we can just lift this old cylinder head off. Just like that. Voila, cylinder head is now removed and we can start disassembling this thing on the bench. All right, so we've got our cylinder head off. Let's kind of take a look at what we got going on. So the first thing we can notice, if we tip it on its side, we start looking, we can see some wet valves. That is a good sign that that's the cylinders that had coolant leaking into it. The good news is it looks like we can use this cylinder head again. There are these little marks over here that are like the limits of machining on the cylinder head, and it has yet to reach them. So there's still more material that can be machined off of this head and have it still be usable, which is fantastic news. So we don't have to replace the cylinder head. Overall, the cylinder head looks like it is in pretty decent shape. Nothing weird going on, nothing abnormal, nothing that looks goofy. But the first thing that we need, or the next thing we need to do with this cylinder head is we need to get the camshaft and all of the rocker assemblies out of here. That will allow the cylinder head to be sent off and pressure tested. So it's a whole bunch of 12 millimeters and 10 millimeter bolts to get off this camshaft and the rocker assembly. So let's go ahead and remove all that stuff right now. All right, now we can get a look at our camshaft, and well, unfortunately, it's kind of more bad news. Let me bring you guys in closer so I can show you what I mean. All right, so you guys look at this cam. I'll take it out so you can see. You'll see there's like a dark coating on the cam lobes, and then here it's like shiny. Well, that is where the coating has worn off, and now you're just straight on the materials of the cam. The coating is gone. So this camshaft is getting kind of worn, but we're not going to let that defeat us. It's still in pretty decent shape. And then looking at all the bearings in here, the bearing surface that the cam rides on, these are still in great shape. Absolutely nothing wrong with any of those, and the valves and everything look okay as well. So that is some good news. Next, we're gonna take off this VTEC solenoid and we can look at the strainer, and that might give us some more information as far as what kind of condition this motor is in. Well, that's not bad. Looking inside the strainer here, not bad looking. No serious metal shavings or anything, which is a good sign. This is good news. VTEC solenoid is telling us some happy things. All right, now the cylinder head has been stripped of everything that needs to be removed before it goes off to machining. So now our head is ready to be machined, and they can resurface our cylinder head, which is great news. that will speed up the process to get this thing back together and running right and fix how this car runs and really improve it. Now let's go take a look. One other thing that we can check while we have it here is we can check how warped this thing is. Now, how do we do that? What's the process? Well, I happen to have a very, very, very special tool that costs way more money than it should. I have a true straight edge. Let's take a look at what that is. So right here we have a Central Tools straight edge. This is a machined true straight edge. So like when I put this on here, if there's any variance, that is showing that it's truly warped because this is straight and we're comparing on that. So what we do is we set it flat, and what you can do is you can use a feeler gauge and you can stick it on these surfaces and see if it fits, or I like to just use a flashlight and check it that way. I've been doing this long enough that I can tell with a flashlight if it's any good. So let me grab my flashlight and let's see if this cylinder head's any good. Okay, so what we're gonna do, stick our straight edge on here, and we are going to shine a light and see if light makes it through just along here on these surfaces. Now you'll see light come around obviously from the combustion chamber area, but we don't want to see light on the actual mating surface. And we aren't seeing a ton. I don't think this head is that warped, to be honest. But that is not any reason to sit there and skimp and just put a head gasket on it. So luckily our head is not very warped, which is fantastic, honestly, considering this thing has been overheated. But that's only half the equation. Now we need to go over and check our engine block. Now, obviously that's not a precision check because I didn't use a feeler gauge, but it is good enough that I am confident that it's not super warped and that it can be saved. Now, the bigger problem is how is the block? So we're gonna set this on our block and we're gonna check for warpage. Well, luckily, there is no warpage on the block either, or it's very minimal. It's negligible, so we can just clean it and that will be ready for the new head gasket. However, we do have one pretty serious problem. And I don't know how well my microphone's gonna capture it, but we're gonna try. You hear that? Hopefully you guys could hear that. That is piston slap. Now, all Hondas are notorious for having piston slap. However, this is a pretty substantial amount of piston slap. What are our choices? Well, we could give up and part this thing out and sell it as is, get our money out of it, and move on. We could put a used motor in it. And then we don't have to deal with the head gasket. We don't have to deal with that. We can just literally drop a used engine in it and be done. Except there's one problem with that. Right now where I'm at locally at the time of filming, there's like no used engines. It's hard to find a running D16 Y8 used engine that's not gonna need some kind of work. If you find one, it's probably gonna have a bad head gasket. It's probably gonna have piston slap. Probably not as bad because it won't have 300,000 miles on it. But it's very difficult to find a good engine just laying around on the shelf. They don't grow on trees. Honda doesn't make them anymore. The other option is we can put new pistons and piston rings in it. Now, I'm not saying that's what we're gonna do. I'm going to take some time and think about it. And by the next video, you guys will know because we're either gonna be pulling the engine out to put new rings in it and pistons in it, or we're gonna be putting it back together as is with a new head gasket and a machined head. But we aren't gonna know that answer until the next video, but that was definitely a little bit of a wrench thrown into it. But at the same time, it's a 300,000 mile car that I got for $100. And the only thing I found in it that's really uneasy for me is that. Everything else seems pretty good. Like condition-wise, the engine's not horrible. It's about what I expected for 300,000 miles. Let me show you one of the things that I like to check on my engines when I take them apart. One of the things I look at on engines when I tear them apart is I look at the cylinder walls. The cylinder walls from new have a cross hatching on them. Now, looking at this, you can see some dull spots in that cross hatching where it's worn out. This is just from the piston riding on the cylinder wall. Not the end of the world, but one way to fix it is to do a light hone, which will help return some of that cross hatching to the cylinder wall, which will improve oil control flow from the oil that sprays the bottom of the piston. Will help with it, and it will help prevent some of the oil from leaking past the pistons and into the combustion chamber. If we're gonna do new pistons, the best thing we could do would be do new pistons, new rings, and hone the cylinders. A light hone. I won't go heavy because we don't need to put in oversized pistons. But overall, like I said, other than that piston slap, the engine block looks just fine. Like, yeah, these all need to be cleaned, but that's pretty normal. We're gonna clean all that out and make it look new again. We have a lot of cleanup to do before we can put this engine back together, but that's not gonna be in today's video. The goal for today was to get this cylinder head ready to go to the machine shop, and would you just look at that? We did just what we needed to do. This cylinder head is ready to go off to the machine shop, which is the perfect stopping point for this video. Well, we had our highs and we had our lows today. We had some good news and we had some bad news. But again, for $100, we're not doing too bad. I'm not worried yet. The biggest worry will come when I start actually pricing out parts, which is going to be between now and the next video that you see. What's next for the car is that cylinder head's going to be getting shipped off to the machine shop. I'm gonna go take it over and get it machined, get it back, and get all my parts ordered to put this thing back together in one way or another. So the next video on this car will probably be putting it back together and getting it started, or we're going to dive into some of the other mechanical problems and we're going to start fixing those next. It's just going to come down to what things happen when parts show up. But with that being said, I want to thank all you guys for watching. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to smash the like button. Leave some comments and thoughts down below. Have you guys ever bought a car for really cheap and run into some really unpleasant problems? Let me know down below. And if you guys want to keep seeing these cheap car builds and race car builds, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future Fix It Garage videos. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.